Today we're happy to have Mozi Etemadi and Alex Heller with us. I got to meet the two of them because they took the weekly trek up from UCSF last semester for my class in interactive device design. And I was really fascinated by all the projects they have going on in UCSF, where they combine low-power wireless sensing with novel mechanical devices and build new medical devices for medical intervention. So just a quick short introduction. Alex has a background in mechanical engineering from USC and is right now in the joint Berkeley-UCSF Translational Medicine master's program. And then Mozi is a MD PhD candidate, so right now is in the PhD program in bioengineering, which is also shared between Berkeley and UCSF. They're both working with Professor Shuvo Roy at UCSF and have, in the course of their work, garnered many awards, such as the Bill and Melinda Gates Grand Challenge Award, the Vodafone America's Wireless Innovation Challenge Prize, the mHealth Alliance Award, and Mozi was also named as a Forbes Top 30 Under 30 Innovator last year. So, now that I've set the expectations really low.
Oh boy.
Thank you.
Please.
Thank you. Thanks, Bjorn. And we really actually enjoyed the class a lot. And the trek was twice a week, not once a week. But it was totally worth it. So we're both grad students. This is going to be exceedingly informal. But we just wanted to tell you a little bit about what we're doing. First, I want to kind of set the stage for the level of technology that we're used to dealing with. So I have a little quiz here. So when do you think the last time hospitals used this software for determining the pricing of procedures for Medicare patients?
Last week. This morning.
Now. Now. All right, that was easy. All right. Which costs more? This is a stethoscope, which is essentially a rubber tube and two pieces of metal, and this is the last generation of Google's phone. It's a stethoscope. It is. $300 4 years ago. 4 years ago. Why would you, you know? So that leads us to Moore's law of medical devices, or it's not really his law, but in 100 years we went from a tube to a tube with little earpieces, and then we made the tube flexible, basically. So, I mean, I'm obviously, you know, being a little too harsh on it. It's a very useful device, but there's clearly room for improvement. And I should mention there are electronic stethoscopes, but they're not used, and we can kind of talk about why. I don't know, actually, but not a whole lot, I would imagine, compared to cell phones, for example. But still, I mean, any economy of scale argument beyond, I mean, it shouldn't be so simple, I think. So we're almost done. This is, I think, one or two more here. So this is a monitor that's used in the operating room. There's typically two of them, and you're watching, basically, surgery happen through a camera. And this is a TV. And so now you know this one costs more, but guess, how much does that monitor cost?
$5,000.
Close. Close. $2,500? It's crazy, right? This one really got me. One MRI machine, which granted is complicated, but the technology isn't super new. All the cell towers in San Francisco. Every single one. Wow. $3 million for an MRI machine. Cell towers are cheap nowadays. They're cheap. So this is kind of this, you know, setting the stage. Our broad mission is we want to make tools to enhance and augment the doctor's ability to diagnose and disease. And the key is, you know, I don't know that we're ready to get rid of doctors. Maybe we will one day, Watson, whatever. And I think that there are definitely approaches to doing that. But we're trying to take existing sensing and make what doctors do easier, more accurate, and more inexpensive. And that's kind of the key. So in doing this, people tend to get lost in translation. So I'm going to define this term for people that don't know what it means. So translation, for us, means basically bench to bedside. So that's a term that gets thrown around all the time in the basic sciences, biology, and that kind of thing. So why do people get lost? Well, there are technical reasons. It's tough to integrate with the body. Even in putting electrodes on the body, your sweat kind of gets in the way and all sorts of weird things happen. There's a big cultural problem that we've been trying to tackle. my RPI, Dr. Roy, always calls this cultural impedance mismatch, basically. So doctors speak a very different language. Even doctors of different disciplines speak a very different language than we do as engineers. So we have to really deal with that. And economically, too, there's regulatory reimbursement problems. How do you get, you might have a perfectly working device, but nobody's going to pay for it because it's not insured. It might even be FDA approved, but the insurance company won't pay for it. So, I think the economic things are often used as roadblocks for people to not work on this stuff. And I think in the common sort of knowledge are often amplified, I believe, beyond what is actually a problem. And you'll kind of see a little bit of that in our devices.
So do you think that FDA, as a result of all the process, might evolve?
Say that again, sorry?
Might the FDA process evolve?
So hopefully it will. So you'll see, we've actually talked to them, and we've presented some ideas to them about kind of of devices that provide information directly to the FDA so that they can essentially provide oversight of devices without a whole lot of burden, because that's the big problem now. You have to hire a staff of like 20 people just to file these 2,000-page documents every couple months. So their response was, the future obviously is that, but we're the government, we're really slow, so it's probably going to be another 20 years or something like that. So, and yeah, you'll see a few of our devices are actually sponsored by the FDA. So they're interested, it's just they are really, really slow. But that said, I strongly don't believe that they are as big of a problem as kind of we make it seem. I think they're used more often as a tool by large medical device companies that are well entrenched in making $2,500 monitors to not, get small companies involved. So I'm sure you've seen this type of slide in many different disciplines, basically. But basically, we have set up the infrastructure over at UCSF and now more and more at Berkeley, too, to do these things. And I should mention, the real reason for us coming here is we really want to recruit people to come work with us. So whether it's needs finding, we've established really cool networks of doctors that are really easy to work with and want to come talk about their issues, and nurses too, and really going beyond just doctors and nurses. There's physical therapists, there's occupational therapists. There's a lot of areas where we can really innovate on this. Rapid prototyping, that's kind of what really excited us about Bjorn's class was there was 3D printer and all this stuff there, and we got to kind of use some of the tools that we were familiar with, learn some new things. And I think rapid prototyping combined with this direct clinician feedback creates some powerful solutions that oftentimes don't even need FDA guidance to get into patients for the first time. And that's kind of the key, I think. Clinical testing, obviously, we're a hospital. We have like 17, literally, I think 17 hospitals and clinics that are affiliated. So there's thousands of patients every day. And product to market, Berkeley has a lot of this kind of stuff going on, too. That's more of the standard stuff. I should mention, though, the Pediatric Device Consortium is one of the vehicles that's been officially put together for this purpose at UCSF. So I'm going to present an example device, and then Alex is going to talk about two devices. We wanted to tackle the problem of preterm birth, which now is even higher in North America than it is in Africa. This is worldwide, something about 6 million babies every year are born preterm, and each is significantly more likely to pass away, basically, of a variety of diseases. So we came kind of naively. This was when I joined a few years ago, and my PI, Dr. Roy, and I sat down with a few of the perinatologists and pediatric surgeons and said, what's one of your biggest problems? And they said, preterm birth. And we're like, well, what can we do to solve that? And it seemed very kind of, naive at the time. But we've actually come quite a long way. So I think the key to understanding preterm birth is kind of understanding birth. And I'm going to go over this real quick. But basically, there's a baby, and it needs to come out of the uterus, through the cervix, through the vagina, into the world, basically. And whether or not this happens early is almost not as relevant. If it happens early, it's because there is an underlying disease that is causing this to happen. So a classic example of a disease that we all know about is an infection, right? So you can get an infection, and in a pregnant lady, in a fraction of the cases, the first symptom of the infection can be the baby being born too soon, not a fever or runny nose, that kind of thing. So if we can detect this process of basically the child emerging, all the pre-processes, which I'll get into more detail about, then we can find out what the underlying cause is and treat it. So that's kind of, this isn't about a treatment, this is about opening up a treatment window. And I'll go into more detail. So yeah, the inciting event is key. And here is, as I said, some of the inciting events. Allergic things, infection. And a lot of these are actually curable if you have more than 24 hours to deliver the baby and treat the problem. So how does this work? Okay, so as baby's developing, it's held in place by the cervix, which is a remarkable organ. It basically starts as densely packed collagen, which is just a protein. I've basically drawn it here as tightly packed green lines. And as things progress, as development progresses, again, either normally or by an inciting event, the cervix will basically change in composition. The collagen will thin out, water is brought in basically, and it'll restructure so it's less densely organized. And this has all been shown in animal studies and things like that. So at this point, this could either be about 2 to 3 weeks before a normal term pregnancy, or it could be 2 to 3 weeks before a preterm pregnancy. All we have as doctors, again, going back to the first few slides, is technology. We look at this, all right? This looks basically, this here is the cervix, the same as this. There's this canal here, which is kind of this canal here. And that's what we look at. And we don't know. We can't look at the microscopic structure of the collagen to see what's going on. We just have this macroscopic shape, whereas underlying factors have started to change much earlier. So what happens? Well, unfortunately, this person will likely go on to deliver. And this is when we can tell what's going on. The shape changes. You can see that on ultrasound, but this is too late. It's 24 to 48 hours. It's basically cat's out of the bag. So what we've done is combine some well-established engineering tools. We weren't inventing new tools. We just invented a new way to put them together, basically. So we're measuring electrical impedance across the cervix and across various points, and I'll show you, and optical fluorescence. So it turns out that this tissue fluoresces a lot when it's cross-linked. It shares some electrons, gives off some light. Again, this is very well established. I think one of the key themes to a lot of our work is we don't do discovery science. That's not really what we're into. So we said, hey, let's measure these things. And people have measured these things independently. Well, we said, well, let's put them together. People have also measured these things once and tried to use it as a spot check for preterm pregnancy. But from other experience measuring these exact two parameters in other parts of the body, we hypothesized that you need to trend this measurement over time, because every person's biology is unique, and like a fingerprint, taking one measurement is not enough. So we do that. And again, in theory, if this works, and we're testing this right now in 30 patients, it'll send a signal wirelessly over Bluetooth to a phone, off to the cloud, which can go to the doctor. It can go to the FDA in the future, and we've talked to them about this, and it can go to the researcher who's running the study, et cetera. So this paradigm is the key to all of this technology working, I think. And we have started integrating this idea into almost every device, and the other two Alex will talk about have this integrated as well. So just to kind of harp on the rapid prototyping a little bit, we tested each of these in healthy volunteers. The way we designed this, and this again has to do with clinician feedback and also a lot of our contacts in regulatory and reimbursement. You want a device that can be tested without massive FDA oversight before the first subject. What does that mean? You have to make it safe. If the device is safe beyond like several orders of magnitude, basically, the FDA is like, okay, no problem, you can test it. And they have basically very stringent rules in place. So one of the things is it has to maintain outside of the cervix. To measure impedance, we can pass 10 microamps and no more of current. There's a couple other things. This is medical grade silicone. These things aren't that expensive. I'm not going to say it's cheap, but the whole budget for this phase of the project, and the current study is like $200,000, which for if you went to an industry partner and told them to run a clinical study for anything less than $3-4 million, they would laugh you out of the room. So So that's what we did. We 3D printed some molds. We injection molded silicone by hand using a syringe. We experimented with different foils, different electrode geometries. Here's our latest prototype, and the final version is here, which this is being used in patients. And I should mention again, we've really built up the network and the expertise of people to the point where this only took, first prototype in human was maybe 3 months, 4 months, followed by another one maybe 2 months later, a couple months later, refined it. And a lot of this comes from the amazing feedback from the patients that we worked with. So here's the device.
I understand.
Mm-hmm.
There's two parts. One side you measuring resistance,
Mm-hmm.
impedance.
Mm-hmm.
So where's the fluorescence coming from?
Sure. So there is a hollow tube here. The fiber optic cable is not being shown. We put a fiber cable in here. You can see the fiber is actually in this one. It is it's relatively inexpensive USB-based fiber optic spectrometer that it's oriented in such a way, and again, this is an off-the-shelf product, where it sends light out essentially like this, and then it reads light in the middle. So you have minimum crosstalk. But again, that is an established product that people in the science field need, like when they're doing contact measurements of fluorescence for other studies, they need that. So we repurposed it for this use. It's protected by a window, basically, and that's it. So it plugs in that. The other end of the fiber optic goes into a USB spectrometer, basically. And this is wireless. This whole thing is wireless. It plugs into a little USB or a little wireless box, basically. I'm not sure what's going on with that, but well, there it goes. All right. And that part has to be not plugged into the wall. So you can't have any electrical contact between the wall and a patient if you're doing any sort of contact with them. Because for obvious reasons, if somebody spills their coffee on your device, you can't have. So again, people used to think of that as like this huge FDA regulate. You just put a battery in and you make it wireless, and the problem's solved, basically.
Can you say something more about this regulatory process as it is for this type of prototype?
Absolutely.
Do they have to, you disclose what you're doing, and they...
Mm-hmm. So here's what happens. So every institution has what's called an IRB, an Institutional Review Board. This is a group of people that actually represents the FDA. It's like a satellite of the FDA. That Berkeley has one, UCSF has one. You propose what you're going to do to them. And they ask a bunch of questions. It's a back and forth. They ask, about the safety. They ask what materials, all these things. You go back and forth. And they determine whether or not your device meets what's called non-significant risk. If it is, which in this case it was not, but it ended up being, and that's kind of a regulatory that you shouldn't think of that as like it's a risky thing. It's just there was like more of a bureaucratic kind of process. But basically, there's 3 ways this can happen. Non-significant risk, where you can test the device in humans because the way it is. It is a significant risk, which means that you need to get what's called an individual device exemption, IDE, from the FDA. That process, that's what people are talking about, is a pain. Is the start of the pain, basically. That's $100,000, 800 pages, mechanical testing, electrical testing. You don't want to do an IDE, basically. So if you can design your device to be non-invasive enough that it meets non-significant risk, which is very stringent. Like, for example, no implanted device is not significant risk at all. So it has to be outside the body, et cetera. And I should mention, this is placed by a physician for a minute every month. We take serial measurements, basically coinciding with the regular visits for prenatal visits. But anyway, non-significant risk. Third category is can't do it. So, which happens to a lot of things. That's why I mentioned it as third category. So that's where people typically get tripped up, is they have this crazy, awesome idea, but it's plugged into the wall, and they don't, their team they have an engineer that's really good at, analog circuit design, but doesn't really know a lot about wireless, so they don't get, it gets stuck there, basically. The FDA is like, well, it's plugging into the wall, you need to do this ISO 60601 certification, and then send us a document, basically, and then it just gets stopped. And rightfully so. In academia, we don't want to spend 2 years, doing a stupid certification. Go for it.
To what extent is the university concerned about reliability issues and patient consent?
Absolutely. So whenever you go to the IRB with something, you send them 2 documents. You send them one document, which is all the technical stuff, and then you send them another document, which is what patients are going to read and consent as research subjects, basically. So they are extremely concerned about that, especially at universities that have large medical centers. And there's oversight and auditing, but you'll find that it's their goal, basically, to make research happen. So they will work with you the whole way through. And this was true also. I used to be at Stanford. Same thing. Their IRB, they'll work with you to make research happen because that's their whole point, basically. So yeah, the patients are consented. The physician has to know about it. You have to. There's like a whole process. You call a week in advance, then you send a letter, then they come in. But these are all things that can be done in a university setting. Okay, with that, I'm going to turn it over to Alex, who's going to talk about the other thing.
So, sorry. So I'm sure you all probably know somebody that has sunken chest. It's called Excavatum. I'm sure you've seen it. I know I had a lot of friends. Mostly, I know in college, it was pretty novel because people would take Jello shots out of the sunken chest. It's pretty serious. In some cases, it can be so bad that your chest is sunken so much that it actually is impeding lung and heart function. So the current, where's the clicker on this thing? Oh, there we go. The current treatment right now is called the Nuss Procedure. And Maz and I had been told that this is not a pleasant procedure, and then we actually went into YouTube this morning and looked it up. And it's not for the faint of heart, but if you do, go take a look. What they do is they basically put a hole in your chest and then bend a rod, shove it through, and then take wrenches and twist it. It is extremely painful, excruciating, and painful to watch.
And it doesn't work, I should mention.
It doesn't work.
Yeah.
It doesn't. Well, in some cases it works, but
like 50% of the time, it doesn't work.
And it has, as you can imagine, shoving the rod through somebody can lead to complications. So basically, this doctor we know, Dr. Michael Harrison, he's basically the guy that invented fetal surgery, first one to ever perform it. He loves magnets, and he came up with this crazy idea where you, instead of jamming this rod through a person's chest, your sternum is the only thing that's really sunk. So he thought, well, why not just cut a little incision and stick a magnet behind the sternum, and then put a brace with another magnet on the outside that would slowly pull it out. So it'd be like comparing the Nuss procedure would be like going to get, I don't know, orthodontic surgery versus like having braces where you slowly over time get it tightened little by little. Not as much pain, not as much complications. It takes longer, but it's better for the patient in the long run. So we actually went through, and they've done a clinical trial. I think it was on 10 or 12 patients.
Yeah, 10 patients.
And they had a lot of success with that. Everybody loved it. There was one kid that really liked it because it's a big magnet, so everybody would always throw paper clips out his shirt in class. And
it's great.
it was good.
So what holds the magnet? The thing to be just ripped out?
I think there's a picture.
There's a picture.
Yeah.
They can do it a couple ways. That's what's kind of nice is the magnet is the canister on the outside is kind of departed from the brace design. There's a bunch of different brace design methodologies. Right. In this case, you could do one where it's free floating because you have a giant magnet that's self-centering and wants to hold it there. Mm-hmm. But other people, they wear like scoliosis braces where they come over. It's like a vest you wear. And it's strapped down and holds it in place.
They take that off, though,
yeah.
Like in the shower and stuff.
Yeah.
Which is a lot nicer than the bar, which is always, yeah.
So we went through the trial, and it was very successful, as I said, but it generated a lot of questions. These questions kind of span the gambit, like everything from clinical questions like how often is the child wearing the magnet, to things more scientific, to like how are individual cells responding to these forces, how is the bone reforming, what's going on here. And it's nice because the work we do, it's kind of these questions, there's work for everyone to do. I mean, from the undergrad who's looking to go to med school, wanting to do some basic science, looking at the cells, working for PI, to somebody who's in industry and is looking to get a commercial device put out, it'll ask these same kind of questions. And that's, what did we do? We kind of paired up with Dr. Harrison a few years ago when we both joined with Shuvo. And what they did is that we went in and we added some of those questions were like, how hard is this magnet pushing? How often is this kid wearing the brace? So we went in and we built a simple sensor, pressure and temperature, and just monitors over the time, every time the kid wears it, how often is he wearing it, and then we get that data back, and then we can examine it and try and figure out some of these interesting things, like I don't know what to say. So this is really briefly, here's a picture of somebody before treatment with sunken chest. Here's the x-ray of the device. You can kind of see the internal component behind the sternum and then the magnet on the outside. And then that's when that self-centering brace I was talking about.
Yeah, the magnet is extreme. It's like
It's
1
big.
Tesla or
it's
something.
It's a big magnet.
It's huge.
It's scary.
Yeah,
Yeah, one lives on our wall, and we're scared to take it off.
Yeah.
But what was I going to say about this? Do you remember? No.
That's it.
Question. What is the actual
Patience.
separation distance between the magnet?
So that's something you can actually control.
It like screws out.
Yeah, there's a screwing mechanism there, so you can control it. The closer it is, the more you're going to pull. And there's at a certain point where it's nicer than braces, where you're like tightened, and then a few days later you feel the pain. The kid will instantly say, like, okay, it's pulling too hard, it's a little uncomfortable. You can back it out a little bit and just do that. And we're monitoring that force the entire time.
Yeah, and that's really, I think, one of the key points in one of those questions that Alex was bringing up is, doctors typically treat distance per time.
Yeah.
Whereas that's not how cells respond. Cells respond force per time. So there's people all along that chain, from clinicians to companies to basic science people, that really want to figure that out. So having a wireless sensor in actual patients helps everybody basically figure that out.
So the last thing I was going to add about this, it was really great because we were able to turn that sensing around and implement it into the existing, what we call the CAM.
So temperature is basically for the fact that just measuring if they're wearing.
Yeah,
exactly.
That's what the FDA wants.
Yeah. So it was great because we got to turn this around so fast, and we got almost instantaneous feedback from the doctors, from the patients, the kids, and their parents, and how they feel about this device, any device changes we will need to make, that kind of thing. And this really brings us to back to the framework. This whole device uses Bluetooth. It goes to the cloud, and we're looking at the data. It just fits in that framework, and all our medical devices have this focus of trying to do this remote continuous censoring, keeping people out of the clinic, out of the hospital, remotely monitoring. And then that brings me to SwigSmart. This is what we did for Bjorn's class. About 6, 7 months ago, last summer, a nurse came to one of the PDC meetings we were at and was asking. She works with nursing mothers, and there's actually it's a big deal how much water somebody has when they're breastfeeding. It depends. I don't know.
Yeah,
I've
she's
never
the expert.
breastfed. I don't know, but she was the expert on it. So she wanted a device that could basically track these patients' water consumption, because the way they do it now is they fill up a water bottle, they drink it. Well, did I drink the water bottle all the way down? I don't remember. How many water bottles did I have today? It's hard. So she came to us like, okay, I hear you guys have done this sensing stuff. What do you want to do? And then we didn't really have time at the time, but then we started Bjorn's class, and then we had the time to go through and really develop this device. So all the device is this little puck down at the bottom, which has basically a loading element and our electronic components and a battery. And it detects, every time you take a sip, it's able to detect the change in weight of water and therefore correlate it to how much water you're drinking over the day. And it pushes it through your cell phone to the cloud to do whatever with it. Here's the circuit board. Pretty simple. Hand soldered all the components for the first prototype. And then Bluetooth 4.0. It's got an accelerometer and a load cell. It's pretty simple circuit.
It was not simple enough, though, that we could use it in the class.
Yeah, that's true. I had a little trouble on the last day. So I'm going to hand it back over to Maz.
Oh, can I just, is this going to turn on again? Awesome.
Maybe.
It's fine. So just kind of in closing here, I think it's easy to see how this stuff helps research, but it really, from a medical student kind of perspective, really does help patient care, not only in the direct sense that you're making something better for the patient, but it really, you're seeing, especially with this new Healthcare Act and stuff, you're seeing a big push on empowering patients against their own disease and to know more about it and to act on data, basically. It actually surprised me a lot that there's still, I think maybe in the next few months there will be, but there is still not a blood pressure cuff that's Wi-Fi enabled, for example. That's kind of the kind of thing that people are starting to think about more and more. And there's also been, we're a science campus. There's no engineering over at UCSF, and it's actually helped some of the science community as well. There was a guy that wanted to measure the pressure in a petri dish. They were subjecting cells to pressure, basically, and we were able to plug one of our devices in, and that kind of thing. So who are we exactly? And I'm not really sure, to be honest with you. There's so many things that have kind of gotten involved, but we're involved with BSAC, FDA. The Pediatric Device Consortium is loosely at the center of this. You can go to the website. It's this.org, no spaces. That's kind of how this started. But it's kind of expanded. We've established some pretty good manufacturing partners in the area. And then people have kind of done some startups out of it. We did some stuff with Venture Lab. So we're really kind of, it's growing. Just some of the numbers that we've piled together, basically, there's been about 7 devices, although I honestly don't know how many. There may be 8 or 9. I mean, yeah, it's kind of hard to keep track. 40 patients, many large animal trials, so I should mention, in the cases where you can't do an IDE, and you don't want to do an IDE because it's too expensive and you can't do a human study, you can a lot of times do the same small study you were going to do in patients, you can do in animals, and then that is currency that you can go to an industrial partner and say, hey, it works in animals. Can you do the IDE, basically? So that's another thing we can do. But, so the limiting factor, though, really, and this is a large part of why we're here, is we have no engineers. I mean, you're looking at us. There's like another guy, and that's it.
Doctors all the time.
So
coming to us with projects,
we really, if
limited
anybody wants to work on this, and I really emphasize, like, it doesn't matter on what level. Like, we have, there's a guy who's doing his sabbatical he's a professor at UC San Diego in CS. He's doing a sabbatical with us. Santa Cruz. There's undergrads from Berkeley that come over, and there is a lot of stuff to do. And I think people can really, there's enough things going on that people can really take ownership. Like we have undergrads that work on projects for 2 years. It becomes their projects. We have my thesis project is one of these things. There's master's students and stuff. So I really encourage, if anybody's interested, please contact us. So I'm going to end with kind of like we began. What is wrong with this picture? See if you can tell. This was a week ago.
Yeah,
okay.
This was a week ago.
We noticed this. We're like, we have to put this in the slide. So that's okay. You actually need to. What? Too many wires. Okay, I agree. Too many wires. Agreed. It's really obvious, though. Like, what shouldn't be here? That has.
So this picture's a little blurry. So
it's a little blurry.
Yeah. I thought
What?
I heard somebody.
So, what's this? Can anybody tell what this is? It's a little blurry. No. Okay, let's zoom in on it. Okay, sorry. All right, I should have taken a better picture. So why is this here? So my first inclination was, hey, this must be a really old machine. So we went and looked at the back of the machine. Manufactured February 2012.
I did not know
They're still making these. So let's talk about why this is. So I got a little angry and I asked them, what are you doing? So this is an ultrasound machine. This is sitting right outside of the cath lab. So when somebody comes in with a heart attack, and you have basically 60 minutes from door to treatment. That's the standard.
Door to balloon.
Door to balloon, yeah. So this is one of the things that they will use sometimes. And they said sometimes they have to do what's called a bubble study, where you inject bubbles into this catheter that's been threaded all the way into your heart, basically. And the latency of digital video was not fast enough to capture the bubbles moving. That's what they said. So you capture it on tape, and you rewind the tape in the operating room. I'm not making this up. So this is the kind of thing that just begs for people to come and solve this problem, right?
This company is making oodles of money.
Oh, yeah, this is Philips, or this is GE.
20 years old.
General Electric.
This was Philips.
It could have been, yeah. It's not a GE. Maybe it's Philips. Yeah, no, this is Philips. The 33 is Philips, yeah. So what can I say? Yeah, Philips, there you go. So with that, remember, there's no competition. Innovation is a conversation away. And thank you.
I assume that having an implanted magnet precludes the use of MRIs. Is there some option to, if someone really needs an MRI, have to go and take out the magnet?
You do. So fortunately, the kids are usually really healthy otherwise. And you can get away with doing a CAT scan a lot of times without an MRI. In kids, you'd like to not do a CAT scan because of the radiation. So that is a problem. And again, as part of so they had to do an IDE for that study. And as part of the consent process, you talk to the parents specifically about that issue. You say, your kid might need an MRI. They can't get it, basically. And you're taking that risk.
Even with the Nuss procedure, they're putting stainless steel bars in there. And that's the same thing with MRI. You can't put it in there.
There is no procedure currently that does it.
Orthopedic implants in general, they have trouble going to the MRI.
Yeah. Sure.
Kind of related to what I asked earlier about regulation. If you want to take some of these things beyond study to a product, is there a similar story as far as
So
levels of
that's
regulation?
So that's where, unfortunately, if you do want to take it to a product, you do need to go through the process. There's 2 FDA pathways. The one for devices is relatively easier than the one for drugs. It's still, you're talking a couple $1,000,000. Like, it's not like an overnight thing. But that said, because of the lack of innovation, if you get past that study with 30 patients, which is what we've basically been doing, then the companies are very willing to work with you. It's that first step that trips everybody up. So good news and bad news.
If you have a working prototype and you go to a VC that's in the medical field, that's like you are light years.
Yeah, first
ahead
to human is
everybody
huge.
else.
Yeah.
So, kind of talking a bit from our perspective, given that you guys have shown that actually you can rip up this device quite rapidly, what would help you to make the whole process faster? What's the biggest hurdle that you have to overcome to take some of those technologies, develop and build the prototype? Is it figuring out what to do? Or is it the building, or even within the building are there some parts that say, well, gee, this could be a lot better done?
So I think the number one thing, like we mentioned, is the manpower issue, is that the doctors are always eager to talk about the problems, basically, and you need an engineer there to like figure out what's going on. So that's the number one issue. And then once we identify the problems, then you need somebody to work on it for 6 months to a year at least. And we don't have that either, basically. But there definitely comes, I would say in 20 to 30% of the cases, it's not something immediately off the shelf. It's also not something completely like novel. It's something that somebody that works in an engineering lab could probably figure out how to do. But it's not to the level of like an ASIC or something. It's like maybe a circuit that needs to be built, or a sensor that needs to be tweaked, or something like that.
Novel mechanical system.
So those are our main blocks. And I mean, the more ideas that come, a lot of times doctors come and they have zero funding to work on one of these things. So that's also an issue that we're very well aware of. But we can apply for grants and stuff like that too.
Do you do any work?
Oh, sorry.
Do you do any work with the VA, and do they have a different kind of regulatory structure?
I'm not completely familiar. So from a patient care standpoint, we're completely integrated with them. The doctors go back and forth all the time. From a regulatory standpoint, the only time I've done VA studies has been when I was at Stanford. And the Stanford IRB oversees activities at the VA, I believe. It's one IRB. So it all comes down to what IRB you send your protocol to, basically, for the regulatory stuff. But in working at the VA, just from my own experience, is awesome. And that's one thing we really want to do. In our case here, it's clearly, it's like way across the city. It's as far as you can get. UCSF Mission Bay is on the east side, like southeast. The VA is like on the northwest side. And it's like on top of a hill. There's no parking. So there's been a lot of reasons why we haven't worked. But recently, actually, yesterday morning, 2 docs from the VA came and had a couple ideas. And so yeah, we're definitely looking at it. They have an awesome medical record system that's still like 15 years old, but it's way better than what we're using, which is paper. So we just upgraded like 6 months ago, but yeah.
Upgrade is a strong word.
Yeah, that's a whole nother, don't even get me started on it, but yeah.
Great. So I appreciate you sharing some of these great stories with us.
Thanks.
I'm curious about, you also, it kind of came up quickly, but you had in there like the tech shop that you'd worked with and some other folks. And when I look at the kind of genre of the projects you talked about, obviously some of them require, definitely medical expertise, but certainly the last one was a lot more accessible to people that maybe don't have a medical background in innovating. I'm wondering if some of the innovations you talked, the ideas, and you said specifically you're not really trying to invent new things, but you're adopting them or making them more accessible. How are you drawing from those other communities like the maker movement and the tech shop? And has that been a separate source of ideas or connections, or people? I just know as another fact, some people are maybe more willing to, this comes across the wrong way, but like experiment on themselves. They'll try stuff out, right? I don't need FDA approval to go, attach something to me and do something. I'm not advising this, of course, but I'm just saying, let's just full disclosure, people do this. So like this is another kind of outlet to have dialogue with, and I'm just curious what your reflections are on that.
So we've a little bit, you go to tech shop more than me. I don't know that people
are usually doing their own thing.
Yeah.
Taking class there, they're a great place to learn the basics. I learned a lot there. Right.
But yeah, to get to your point, we'd like to. I just think we're just bandwidth limited. Honestly, like we are like limited by even our own network in UCSF. We still haven't kind of reached out. But I agree that especially now, there's all this maker movement going on outside of academia, and I think many makers would be absolutely perfect for this. Like, so. Yeah.
I mean, if coming from the maker standpoint, I mean, medical devices are probably like, there's a reason people haven't done it. It's like, oh, it's medicine, like the FDA, and there's all that crazy stuff.
Exactly.
And,
yeah.
oh no, it's so scary. It's really, once you figure out some of the basics, it's not terrible, and like, it's not bad.
It's really, yeah. And so, I wish like there was a forum to basically convince. I mean, that's what we're doing, I guess, convincing people of, it's not that bad. You come in, yeah, it's a hospital, it's kind of scary, there's a lot of people, but like when it gets down to it, like it's a bunch of old computers and like people. It's not that bad. So. All right, well, thanks a lot.
Thank you.
All right.